It's better the other one because it's so
She
small.
said magic muffins, thank you,
Thank
of the tea house. The box.
Oh, yeah. Everything, no, so, need anything?
Oh.
No. Okay.
I'm gonna reach out to that person who sent me these.
Oh, you're welcome.
It'll come right back.
No, they go.
Oh, yeah, I have like a student send that to you, but like some event for mom.
Oh, sit on the side. Sit over there. I'm so happy, I don't know why I'm so happy.
Yeah.
You know what? It's a beautiful day, but the.
Oh, yeah.
And not only
Yeah.
that,
Why is it to not be happy?
the more I learn how laughing helps you, it's like, I haven't stopped
Yeah.
laughing, it's like, wow.
It's no. No, it's, Fresh Market.
Oh.
And 19, actually, they have a sale on Thursday, which is a really good day to buy it. Oh, yeah, I don't go there much. They're like $6 on Thursday. Exactly, they're very expensive.
What are you having?
It's chicken and cranberry relish and corn
Cornbread
something,
is great.
cornbread. Save it for this. With all that. No, I wasn't gonna, they had turkey too, but I wasn't gonna get that because I was.
All right, everybody, just need one more minute. I want to make sure that the document is uploaded properly for those who might be signing up online.
It's always going with them. Period. Oh my God, as well for the rest.
I have to share my screen.
Here's everybody.
Do that too. Hello,
Did you go to the place?
I don't know.
They don't have it today. Oh, they don't have it every other week. I guess then.
Good to be with you all. Gonna settle in. So if you're eating, wait to take your next bite, please. Or your next sip, whatever you are drinking. I just wanna bring ourselves into the present moment, so we will turn off our cell phones, please, or put them on silence if you haven't done that, or airplane mode. Making sure, yes, I want to do not disturb. And feeling your feet firmly on the floor, your legs uncrossed, spine straight, shoulders relaxed, palms facing upward on your lap. And we'll take 3 breath cycles here. Inhaling deeply through your nose and exhaling completely also through your nose, if that is available to you. If not, inhaling through your nose and exhaling through your mouth. Trying to balance out your inhale and your exhale. So if you're inhaling for 2, exhale for 2. If you're inhaling for 4, exhale for 4. Continuing to take 3 breath cycles. When you're ready, tapping your toes, wiggling your fingers, opening your eyes, they have been shut down. Coming back to our space. Anybody else notice the shift, or was it just me? There's like a sense of deeper calm. So for those who did not make it last week, I'm going to do about a 1-minute overview just to connect you to what it is we are studying. This is a lunch and learn on Mussar and mindfulness. Mussar, maybe I should ask you, for those of you who were here last week, what do you remember about Mussar? Should I put anybody on the spot, or should I just give you the answer? Let's see, somebody took notes.
I
You
have
have
no.
notes. Okay.
I have.
Mussar is a system that helps us isolate, identify character traits that we can learn to become even better human beings than we are. So it started for many hundreds of years in a more personal way, a personal looking at character traits such as order, simplicity, zeal, compassion, anger, patience. There are actually 48 different traits. And each of us has our own spiritual curriculum that's going to be different from everybody else. So this is really an opportunity for you to sink into what you know you need, or what you think you need, or what other people told you you might need. And so it's really a time to be self-reflective. This movement became more pronounced and more communal in the 19th century with Rabbi Israel Salanter. And sadly, during the Shoah, during the Holocaust, most of the Mussar Rebbe's teachers were murdered. And it was not until recently, I'd say the past 20-ish, 30 years, that Mussar as a school and an institute has been resurrected, so to speak. There were a few teachers who were left, who transmitted, and so now there are several organizations in the States who teach Mussar. Last time we spoke about equanimity. Somebody want to tell us what equanimity is?
Being at peace with whatever is.
Yes, being at peace with whatever is. Yeah, not getting too high, not getting too low. Just accepting what is.
As balance.
As balance, yes,
Thank you.
equanimity is also balance. So. Well, yeah, I guess I'll just leave these here in case anybody else shows up. So today we are going to be looking at the trait of anava, which is humility. But before we do that, I wanted to go into a little bit greater detail of where the word Mussar comes from. Where does the word Mussar come from? So if you look at the top of your study sheet, we find the word Mussar. Where do we find it? In the Tanakh. The Tanakh is the Bible. Yes. What is it? What's it? It's an acronym, actually. The T stands for Torah. The N stands for Nevi'im, prophets, and the Ka.
It's for like, proverbs or
Writings.
Writing.
Excellent. So Tanakh is an acronym, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. So the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. All of these quotes come from the writings section. So the book of Proverbs says the following: Shma b'ni musar avicha va'al titosh torat imecha. Heed, my son, the instruction of your father, and don't forsake the teachings of your mother. So for those of you who read Hebrew, if you count 3 words in, remember starting on the right, Mussar, right? So you can see that is the word, one of the definitions, instructions. The next one is also from the book of Proverbs, which is found in the 3rd section of the Tanakh. Korea Mussar, Mo'es Nafsho, Vishomea Tochachat Koneh Lev. One who rejects discipline hates oneself, but one who hearkens to reproof gains understanding. So here we see Mussar is being translated as discipline. Yes. And the last reference, Sur Merah Va'aseh Tov, turn away from the wrong path and do good. So 3 places in the Tanakh, and we get a sense that the word Mussar can be multivalenced, right? It can have this sense of instructions, of discipline, or of turning away, right? Sort of recalibrating I spoke last week about there being a spectrum with each character trait. And so the goal is to be like Goldilocks. You want to be right in the middle. You don't want to be too much on one side or too little on the other side, but you want to be in the middle. And so this last understanding, Sor Mera, you see the root in the word Mussar. You can hear the Sor, Sar, Mussar. So it's a turning away, which can mean if you, depending on where you are on that spectrum, you need to dial down or dial up your knob so that you can find a place more of middle ground, right? Of this equanimity, this place of balance within the spectrum of each midah, of each character trait. Any questions up until this point? We're good. Okay, great. So any volunteers to read an unpublished draft by Rabbi Rachel Bovitz and Dr. Herb Levine? Thanks, Maddie.
Okay. I'll just read loud. Think about the moment when the shofar sounded on Rosh Hashanah. We've been taught to hear in its call the message, sleepers awake. In that spirit, Mussar asks, are you awake? By awake, we mean, are you making conscious choices to live each moment with care and honesty toward others? Or are you sleepwalking through your days? In the early centuries, the rabbis wanted to discern the key principle of the Torah. They came up with two: love your neighbor as yourself, and all humans are created in the image of God. Learning to love our neighbor as ourselves is no easy matter. If it were, we would all be doing it and living it in a very different world. Reb Simcha Zezel of Kelm, a leading Mussar teacher, believed that we learn to love our neighbor by sharing in their burden. No say, but in chavaro. His phrase harks back to the biblical commandment to help someone whose donkey has fallen down. We're commanded to see the fallen donkey as our problem and not theirs alone. In a similar vein, and based also on biblical sources, the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas relates the concept to the divine. God is the obligation to serve the infinite other carried on the face of my neighbor.
One more paragraph.
Mussar is not theology alone, but a compendium of practices that brings insights into theology into our lives for the better. It offers strategies to grow our capacities to be awake in our neighbor's burdens and to sustain wakefulness in all areas of our lives.
Thank you. All right, so I want to unpack that a little bit. Hi, Jenny, welcome. I want to make sure you can hear. You can hear okay? Great.
Right.
Okay, so how does this expand our understanding of Mussar? What does this add to our discussion that wasn't here last week? I'm gonna give you about another 30 seconds to read it on your own and see, yeah, hang on one second. Can you hold your thought for 30 seconds? Don't lose it. Okay. What is here that was not here last week? All right. Yes.
This idea of serving the infinite as being a metaphor for the face of your neighbor, with the concept that you don't really know your neighbor, but your obligation is to serve Hashem through the face of that person. And it really does talk about the history of the Jews with regard to the inability to inculcate Hashem within everyday life. And so if your neighbor is the incarnation of that service, it becomes much more intimate and a lot easier.
Yes, exactly. There's a beautiful line from Les Mis. That's something like to see the face of another is to see the face of God.
Yeah.
And so if we can go through our lives and see the face of another as the face of God as the infinite, that certainly, I believe, would make our world kinder. And if we could really see and believe that each of us are created in the image of God, and how do we see that infinite in another? So a piece that is here this week that wasn't here last week. It's in the third paragraph. Has to do with the donkey. What does it mean to carry the burden of another, to share in the burden? Right, so to think about Mussar as a way of sharing somebody else's burden. Which we've spoken a lot about ourselves and how we become better, more evolved people, but then what is our responsibility to another? So let's say you are working on the trait of patience. It's important for yourself to work on that trait, and how might it help another person who is carrying a burden of feeling that they are stressed and they have to get everything done, and could you offer your patience to them so that you're gonna lessen their burden? You know what? I see that you have so much to do and that you're so stressed, so don't worry about it. You know what? I'm gonna come over and watch your kids for an hour. And I'm gonna let you relax. I have the patience right now. I can do that. I'm gonna sit with it. So thinking about Mussar, yes, for ourselves, and also taking these traits and how are they going to impact our neighbors? How can we see the infinite of the divine in another, and how can we help lighten the burden, share the burden of our neighbors? Question?
Similar comment, so.
Okay. So what I want to do now is to move and look at anava, which is humility. So there are several texts that we're going to be looking at. Please raise your hand, ask questions if I'm going too quickly. I have lots of questions to ask you, but please know that you can ask questions if any of this. Did you have a question, Lauren?
I do.
Yes.
It goes back to just the study of Mussar.
Mhm.
So, and breaking it down, self-reflection and, yeah, journaling. So I was just curious to see if that is also applicable to what we're doing now.
Yes, it is. Thank you. So I'm going to do a quick review. We're talking about how one lives into these practices. How do you work to change a character trait? So there is a morning wake up practice, right? I'm going to set my intention. Going to be focusing on humility. Usually these traits are worked on in a week. So I didn't follow up with you about your equanimity. So I'm going to just put that in the parking lot. I'm going to finish my thought and I'm going to come back to equanimity. So there's a morning intention, and then there really is actions during the day to focus on that trait. And if you get a little sidetracked, remember you're going to have a chant. I hope you all received the chant. It was on the bottom of the email, so I don't know if you all saw it. So that helps to keep you on track. If you start to feel a little unmoored, go back to your mantra or your chant, so relating to your character trait, and then journaling at the end of the evening to say, how did I do today? When I had these opportunities, how did it go? And this is, again, without judgment, not you're such a terrible person or you're a rock star. Remember, we are focusing on equanimity. We're just gonna notice what happened and how we responded and what was evoked for us. So now I'm gonna go back to that parking lot and I'm just gonna ask if any of you had an opportunity to work on equanimity. If you feel like sharing what that was like. And you don't have to share it. That's okay. You worked on it. And Do you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, I had, most of it was very positive. I had one day where, visiting a relative and, I tried to do something nice and I wasn't received the way I wanted to be received. And I felt a little confrontational and, at first I wasn't reactive, but then kind of did not live up to being, the best version of myself at the time. And, afterwards I was able to kind of smooth things over, but I can do that.
Thank you for sharing that and for your honesty. And we're gonna then give yourself some grace since that was the first week that you were trying it.
Yeah.
But really, again, it's really a noticing, like, I'm gonna be okay, I'm gonna be calm, and then you feel yourself getting triggered. And then it's how do you like sort of unhook yourself from that trigger, right? Elohai neshama shenata tabi. That's the chant you're working on. Okay, I'm gonna take another deep breath. Maybe I'm gonna leave the room. Maybe I'm gonna, right? So it's practice and it's gonna take time. Any other thoughts about equanimity? Oh, yes, Maddie.
It doesn't take much since I'm like a perfectionist tendency. Perfectionist tendency, it doesn't take much for me to notice or whatever. And then I've learned through the years to say to myself, do I want peace? Or, do I want to be right? That kind of thing. Do I want peace? And then I really think about what I want in the outcome because I let it wash over me. It's little things. It's just little things.
Yes,
And then I find in general, I'm just calmer.
great. Yeah, so if you decide that you want peace, maybe your mantra is Shalom, breathing, Shalom, right? So again, also connects us to mindfulness, right? We're in the moment, we're discerning, like, what do we want? What's the outcome? What's happening right now? And peace, right? I want peace. I can feel this happening. I want to go into peace. I'm gonna, in my mind, say my little mantra or excuse yourself and go to the restroom and sing your little mantra and go into your car, wherever you can to have that space. And ground it down into whatever the trait is that you're working on. All right, so now, text number 1. Anava means humility. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married. Moses had married. For he had married a Cushite woman. They said, has the Holy One indeed spoken only with Moses? Has God not spoken also with us? And the Holy One heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more so than any man on the face of the earth. Feels like there are some parts of the story that aren't completely laid out here. So if you can, yes, Margaret.
Do you think this is one of the first times that we're seeing racism?
That it's expressed. Yes, sadly, but yes, I don't want to make excuses. And I would say, there's tribalism, right? So what do you want to call it, racism? Yes, and in biblical days, as today, there is a tribalism. So it's really looking at the identity of the identity of the woman, not necessarily the fullness of who she is. Dory.
I was gonna say, wasn't this where Miriam also got psoriasis because of this?
Yes,
Yeah.
she gets leprosy,
Leprosy.
right? She gets leprosy, and who prays for her healing? Moses.
Yeah, but Aaron doesn't get anything. He doesn't have any punishment at all.
He loses 2 kids, that's
Yeah,
worse.
Aaron does
That was
not-
later, though. That wasn't
Yes.
because of this.
So specifically in this case, yes, Miriam gets leprosy. And what does it tell us about Moses? That his siblings were giving him some service, right? Giving him a hard time about his choice in partners. What does it teach us about Moses?
Let it go. He let it go.
Right, do we read? Does
It
the
wasn't a
Bible
big
say
deal.
Moses started arguing back and, nope, it just says, okay. Not only does he let it go, he Dafka turns around and prays for his sister's healing. So when we are, one of the attributes or one of the qualities related to anava, to humility, is the ability to step away. I think of the show Iron Chef, you know, when they say like time's up and people just sort of put their hands up, they can't add even any more garnishes. So it's like that sense of, okay, humility is it's a stepping away. I'm not gonna have to fight. I'm not gonna have to, you know, speak up for myself so much so it's gonna cause an argument, and I'm just step away from the argument. And on top of it, Moses's humility, even if that he was hurt by what his siblings said, he was able to dig deeper into himself and pray for his sister to be healed. So we're gonna now look at Rashi, who's a medieval commentator, and he says that the word anav means low. You can hear the word anav in the word in anava, right? Anava is humility. Anav means low, and a savlan, one who could bear a burden. So what do you think that connection is between humility and the ability to bear a burden? Forbearance. What does that teach us about humility?
You're humble.
You know, I wanted to say it has to do with,
1 second, someone was getting ready to speak?
If you're humble,
Yes,
then you have to be able to bear a burden because you're taking on someone else's, shit, to say it the least. And you're not reacting against it in anger or in whatever.
so if you're humble, it means that you have to be able to carry somebody else's part of the interaction or equation
And not react.
and not react to it. Yes, thank you. Jenny, were you gonna add something?
yeah, well, the word that came to me was restraint. Like keep your mouth shut.
Yes.
You know, it might be, and it would be a feeling, you know, inside that you would have to be disciplined enough to keep it to yourself, which is really hard to do.
Yes, it is really hard to do, especially with my children. It's really hard to say, you know, like, told you so, right? So that's not helpful in terms of fostering the relationship, and it's hard. It's really hard. There's a 1 second, Bob. There's a quick story. This was years ago. I was talking to my son about keeping a gratitude journal. He wasn't interested, didn't want to write it, not a good idea. Hey, just planted the seed. A year later, he calls me and he says, you know, I was thinking like it would be a good idea to start a gratitude journal. And so when I write in the journal, blah, 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 and it took all of my energy, right? This was the restraint. And I went, that is such a great idea. So again, that like place of humility when I wanted to be like, what took you so long? We had this conversation a year ago. No, right? Like, so part of humility is being able to not have to say we're right. It's if we know the truth, we know our experience of the truth, and so it's good enough. We're gonna have a little restraint. Bob.
So I was looking at this issue with regard to Miriam, speaking Lashon Hara
Yes.
against Moses. And if someone comes into my space, that is a boundary that I control. So the function of not being disturbed by it is the protection of one's space. How does that fit in?
Lovely.
Very nice. We're gonna get to that in a second. Can I postpone the answer? Okay. I promise we'll get to it before we leave. Next text. Any takers? Read text number 2. Great, thanks, Anita.
Rabbi Helbo said, in the name of Rabbi Huna, anyone who sets a particular place for him, herself, to pray in the synagogue, the God of Abraham stands in his or her aid, and when he or she dies, people say of him or her, this was a humble person. You want me to read the question?
Sure, you can read the first question.
When does claiming space have to do with humility? He tore us right into that.
I know. So yes, Bob, we're slowly moving toward your question. What is humility? Why are you gonna say that this is a humble person? Right, there's something, I don't know about any of you if you are synagogue goers, but it's called a makom kavua, a fixed space or fixed place. And usually when people go to synagogue, they somehow migrate and they always sit in the same spot.
Yes.
If you can, right? So it's your fixed spot. So we're saying, here's the person who goes into the synagogue and they're sitting in space. Every time they're at synagogue, every time they're at temple, they're in the same spot. The God of Abraham stands in their aid, and when they die, people say, this was a humble person. So how can our understanding of anavut, of humility, anava, anavut, the sense of, right? The first text we looked at was about restraint, not feeling that we have to always say, speak our piece, prove that we're right. How does sitting in the same place week after week teach us about humility?
From a different point of view, I think of humility as a larger idea in terms of understanding that it's not that important. Right? Are we, we always want to build ourselves up with how important we are, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, we're very small in terms of who we are on this earth. And we're even smaller based who we are on this planet or this universe. When you look at it, we're relatively compared to everything.
Yes.
So you can't be tricked into the idea that, like, if you're not humble, you're not really realistic, are you?
If you're not humble, you're not realistic. Can you say more
Yeah.
about that?
Get that?
Just from a point of view of being like,
Oh, I see what-
understanding
okay.
how unimportant you really are.
Yes.
Which is a sense of humility.
Yes, got it, okay. So yeah, one of my favorite teachings, Reb Simcha Bunim of Pshischa, I just like saying his name, so it's one of my favorite teachings. He teaches that we are to carry 2 pieces of paper in our pockets, right?
I love that
Notice?
one.
So one of them says, right, when we're feeling less than humble, right? We're feeling really on top of the world and we're just amazing. You put your hand in your pocket and you take out the one that says, I'm nothing but dust and ashes. And when you're feeling very low, maybe a bit despondent, you put your hand in the other pocket and it says, for me, the whole world was created. And so how do we live in this tension? But definitely with humility, understanding that we are a speck of 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 a speck in the universe. And if that doesn't make you humble, right? Bobby, were you gonna?
No, I was gonna say that too, that to me, humility is, I am no better, smarter, or anything above anybody else. And so that goes to the low position, because we are all, as you said, created in the face of God.
Yeah.
which I was also thinking about your blog. I don't know if other people get your blog, but how to react to people of a different religious faith, political faith, behavior, whatever that you may think is not in accordance with what you see as godly behavior.
Yes.
How do you communicate with them and love them with the humility that you have without losing your humility? And you have to say to yourself, this person was also created in
Yes.
in the being of God, and you're no better, even though you believe your beliefs may be better. And with what I read about what you said, I have been thinking about, since I do love my neighbors, to open the communication and see what's in there. But I haven't gotten to that point yet.
It's so take time. So I have a newsletter that I write monthly, and basically the question was, what now? What do we do post-election? So if you're interested, we can talk afterwards. I'm happy to share it with you, but that's what.
But it goes back to humility.
It does go back to humility of how we see ourselves, how we see others. There's one piece, because I really want to, I promised you I would answer, Bob. There's a great
Well, did
line
you-
by Alan Moranis, who is
Right.
one of the founders of
He is,
reintroducing Mussar back into 20th century life. And he says, no more than my space
right,
and no less than my place.
right.
No more than my space and no less than my place. And so when somebody sits in the same seat every single time they're at temple, they are taking up their space. They are taking up their rightful space, right? They are stepping into their selfhood, hopefully their fully actualized selfhood. And so this was such a really eye-opening concept for me when I learned about Anava and Mussar, because I feel like in America, I can't speak for all of Western culture, but in America, there's the sense of like, you have to be humble, you have to be a little bit meek, a little bit of deference, you don't want to like rock them, you don't want to seem like a big know-it-all. And this is saying just the opposite. This is saying you need to take up your space. Whatever it is you're here to do, whatever your mission is, whatever your roles and relationships are, being humble means taking up your space, no more than your place though. That doesn't mean, I don't know, let's say you came to be a teacher, and then all of a sudden you're teaching and it's great and you're taking up your space, and then you feel like, well, you know what? There's, an electrician coming to fix the light, so I'm gonna just tell the electrician what to do, and I'm gonna, because I read about it and I taught the kids about electricity, I'm gonna suggest how to fix this light, right? So it's not like going overboard and assuming that you are the be all and end all of everything. We don't wanna like take too much of the place, but you wanna take up your space. And so just a question for each one of you to think about in terms of your own lives. Where are you on the spectrum of humility? Because on one side we have arrogance, right? But on the other side we have self-debasement and and low esteem, right? And really not owning who you are. So trying to figure out how to get to that middle ground of taking up your space, but not more than your place.
Well,
Hang on, I want Maddie and then Jenny.
I usually carry a visual with me that I'm a piece of the mosaic of the rest of humanity in the world.
oh, wow.
It's almost like you have a globe, I'm a piece of that. And I learned a lot that humility, because if I want to think about something, it comes from my perspective, my life experiences, which are no more valid than anybody else's.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Jenny.
A couple of things, because I did study with Alan and back in Chicago, and it was really, really neat. But I learned a couple of things in the past from this. May I share briefly?
Sure.
Okay, so I used to always have to sit in front of the room and answer every question. Oh, gee, I've had my hand up all this time too, I guess, Amy. So, but that didn't change. But I used to always have to sit in front of the physical room, raise my hand, and be answering with intelligent answers. And after I studied this, I started sitting in the back of the room and letting other people have a chance and shutting up. Oh, it was like really, really interesting. On the other hand, I had a friend, an older friend, this was back in Chicago as well. She and her husband used to take in guys who worked at grocery stores, then they were baggers, they were maybe middle-aged guys, they couldn't get a decent job. And one time she took in this guy who was really a loser, and he didn't like what the husband said one day because he was living there. I mean, they take him in, and the guy was living there at the house. They didn't like what he said. The guy didn't like what they said, and he took out a lighter and set the place on fire. With the drapes. So and actually the husband wound up dying. Okay. So now you would think that the woman would be like putting charges against that guy, taking him to court. So she'd be very upset. She'd be, oh my God, she was married for like a zillion years. So I was like, okay, well, like, what are you going to do about this? Are you going to call the police? I mean, like, she goes, oh, no, no, he didn't mean to do it. He's like emotionally disturbed. And I thought to myself, this is the absolute epitome of letting people walk all over you. Because humility doesn't mean letting people walk all over you, because we each have a spark of the divine in us. So if we let people walk all over us, we're actually putting God in the trash.
All right, so your story relates to the last text that we're gonna look at, and I hope that we're gonna get there. So let's keep going, because I want to be mindful. We have about 20 minutes left and 3 more texts. Text 3, thank you for, I say thank you, it's a horrible story. And yes, there are times when we do need to speak up, and humble means sometimes having to stand and stick to our moral clarity. Okay, when we're conversing with someone, do we spend the whole time searching for launching points for what we want to say? Or do we actually listen to appreciate what they are trying to relate? The first stance is the hubris of believing that what we have to say is primary. Certainly my insight is brighter, my interpretation more inspiring, and my perspective more valuable. The root of the Hebrew word for humility, anava, is la'anot, which means to answer. When the humble person speaks, he participates as one component of the whole. She truly responds. So again, this is just for you to think about in your own lives. When somebody shares something, are you the first to jump in and say, I know just what you're talking about, the same thing happened to me, and oh, you think that's a hard situation, but you should care about my situation, right? So how do you answer? How do you respond? And being humble means responding in an appropriate way, perhaps withholding a little bit, not feeling that's not necessarily your space to take up, right? And if the person is looking for you to say something, you also don't want to not take up your place. You don't want to be somewhere where somebody is looking for a response and you just don't say anything because you're going to be so withholding. You're going to have so much restraint. So noticing in your own lives, I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to think about where you fit on this spectrum. And again, please don't judge yourself. You might decide, I'm actually great with answering, so I'm good with humility. Or you might say, you know what, maybe I just offer a little bit too much of myself. Maybe I offer too little of myself. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about where you fall on that spectrum of listening to others. Right, everybody has their current GPS location on the humility spectrum. There is a teaching from Pirkei Avot, Ezehu Chacham, who is wise. Halomed Mikol Adam, the person who learns from everyone. And so again, bringing humility to wherever we are. Everybody has something to teach us. I remember many years ago, I had a flat tire. I was stuck at a gas station. I couldn't figure out like how to get the air in the tire, and it was like, you know, not like a nail, but it was, I needed to put the air in the tire. It had been several years, and I'm just see somebody next to me, and in my very embarrassed to admit judgmental way, I looked at the person and I was like, oh, I don't know, like looked a little scary of a person. And the next thing I know, he comes over to me and says, oh, you need some help? Let me show you what to do. And I just went like, okay. Who was wise? The one who learns from everybody. Thank you so much for being my teacher today. Thank you for teaching me how to remember to put air in my tires. And so how can we go through our lives? Hopefully trying, and again, we're not always going to get it right, but just remembering that everybody has something to teach, and the wise person is truly the one who learns from everyone. So let's keep moving. Any questions before we move on to the next text? Good, okay, text 4. Text 5 is. Somebody like to read text 4?
Sure.
Short one, Bobby?
After these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Hineni, here I am. Here I am, Hineni, is the response of the pious. This Hineni applies anava and alacrity. What is implied in the word Hineni? What is a Hineni moment that you can remember? When didn't you say Hineni and should or could have? What is one thing you can do to live with more anava?
Thank you. Yes.
I think firemen have this where they show up with their whole being, their whole intention, their whole job. And when you go to thank them later, you bring them cookies, cake, ice cream, whatever it is for helping your loved one. And they're so humble. And they're like, oh, thank you. Like, of course, they're happy to get the cookies, cake, whatever, but they're like, oh, thank you. So they're so grateful, but every day they show up and they have these immense jobs to do, life-threatening usually. And they show up, every part of them for every second shows up to do their task. And I feel like that is like a, here I am.
Yeah,
kind of
great
person.
example. Yeah, that's a real hineni, right? You're showing up, full self presence with alacrity, right? You're like, actually, like, there's a cheerfulness about you showing up. You're glad to be there. Anita, yeah.
I'm just gonna answer you. The recognition that you're giving them is important. You're seeing them. Oh, they're suddenly understanding that you're giving them the cookies. It doesn't matter what you gave them. Right. Oh, absolutely. What they're responding to is the fact that you saw them, and especially in a situation where maybe a loved one is in the hospital and you bring cookies or something to the aides that are working. The person is grateful, not because you brought the cookies, but because you saw them. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm just thinking like, you're right, and I feel like I once said to my son, listen, showing up is 80% of the job. Like, just the idea that you show up to work, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, like, you have to have the capacity and capability. But the idea that that you show up every day, or you show up when you're supposed to show up, is a big deal, and it's a big deal in your job and in life, but that's like the here I am
Yes.
kind of thing.
Does anyone think of a hineni moment in your life? Or a missed hineni moment?
Yeah. I think with Hineni, it's not thinking about it. It's just reacting at the moment that you're needed. It's really a cool thing. you know? It's like you see somebody on the street and she needs, to get across the street, or somebody needs something and you don't stop to think about it as, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? You kind of like just do it.
Yes.
But so, yeah, I would say so. I was just gonna tell you, I was on the railroad, where you're waiting for the train to come. And it was evening. I was coming up from the airport and it was evening. And the only spot was near this guy who looked like homeless, and was a different color than myself. And I had about an hour to wait till the thing was coming. I'm like, geez, should I stand or should I sit? And then, I just sat down with him and we just started talking. And it was the coolest thing, and it turns out he was actually a jazz musician coming home from a gig, and then people passed and they were looking at me. And I made a special effort to just be engaged with that guy, to be talking with him, and did so also on the train. And I felt like it was a Hanini moment because I was able to like be in that space at this moment. And I was able to teach myself and maybe others that it's not always, just a superficial thing, that you can go soul to soul,
Yeah, soul to soul on the train.
Yeah.
Bob.
That would be a jazz song.
What did she say?
No, she said it could be a jazz song.
Can I
soul to
ask-
soul.
Changing my children's diapers,
Say that again?
changing my children's diapers.
Yeah. Changing children's
Definitely
diapers.
the name.
Like, do you want to practice eating? Liliana.
My son was telling me that he was getting out of the supermarket. He bought groceries for the whole week with no phone, and then he saw a gentleman in the middle of the street. And he stopped and he gave him cash. And the guy said two things. He said, "Thank you for noticing me, and thank you for not judging me."
Oh, wow, and that was not
Wow.
judging, yeah.
Wow, that's really powerful. Lullaby, may we all live into that. All right. With the last 10 minutes, we have a long text, so I'd like to go over this text from Gittin, from the Babylonian Talmud. Somebody want to read one paragraph?
I'll read.
Bar Kamsa sought refuge from the Jewish.
Revenge.
Revenge from the Jewish leaders of Jerusalem. Offended him. He went to the Roman governors to inform them that the Jews were rebelling. To prove this point, he told the Romans to send a sacrifice to the temple. Normally, such a sacrifice would be offered up, but Bar Kamsa caused a minor blemish on the animal that was unnoticeable to the Romans, but that he knew the temple priest would see, because the sacrifice must be blemishless. Bar Kamsa knew that the priest would be bound to refuse to accept the offering. This refusal would be proof that the Jews were in rebellion against Rome.
Everybody have the storyline?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody else want to continue, or Bob, do you want to continue?
When the sacrifice came before the priests in the temple, they immediately spotted the hidden blemish, as Bar Kamsa knew they would. But what he may not have anticipated was that they immediately understood what was going on. Someone suggested they go ahead and offer the sacrifice anyway. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas, however, argued that if they did that, people would draw the incorrect conclusion that it was permitted to offer blemished sacrifices.
Okay, so what's his dilemma?
And if you do it.
Right, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas says, well, this is really a dilemma, right? On the one hand, if I don't accept this offering, then this is really going to be a problem with Rome. But if I do accept the offering, then people are going to think it's okay to bring blemished animals for offerings. All right, somebody else? Next. Fran?
It was then suggested that Bar Kamsa be killed to prevent him from telling the Romans and endangering the Jewish people. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akulas responded saying, if we do so, people will incorrectly think that those who inflict blemishes on sacrifices are put to death. As a result of the priest's unwillingness to accept either course of action, Bar Kamsa succeeded in his plan. The sacrifice was denied, and as Bar Kamsa had planned, the Romans took this to mean that the Jews were in rebellion. Well, the Romans attacked and ultimately destroyed the temple. So, yeah.
The Talmud concludes the humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas caused the loss of our home, the burning of our sanctuary, and our exile from the land.
So that was
So-
way too humble, right?
He was too humble,
I
right? What should he have done, right? This
don't
was
know.
more of like, well, you know, I don't want to take up my place. I don't want to take up my space. I want to just try to dance in between these realities instead of, you know what? I'm gonna make an executive decision as the priest. Here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna accept this one animal because we don't want to offend Rome. And moving forward, you need to know, people, that we're not accepting offerings with blemishes. But he didn't want to ruffle too many feathers, didn't want to take up his space. And so we see what happens when we don't step into the roles that we are given, assigned to, grow into. And this is really a deeper understanding of anava. So I'm hoping that from our text study today, this idea of anava has really been expanded. And it's not just about, no, you know, I don't want to seem like a show off, or I don't want to seem like a know-it-all, but it's about taking up your space, right? You want to take up your space, no less than your place. Also, maybe have a little restraint. You don't always have to respond. How do you also recognize that, yeah, there is a piece of us that we're teeny in the world? That is a part of humility. But again, just noticing where you are on the spectrum. Are you so much that, oh, you know, I'm nothing but dust and ashes? Or are you, wow, the whole world was created for me? And where on this anava spectrum do you turn the dial for yourself so that you can think into what it means to be humble, learning from everybody, and take up the space that you were made to take up. So an invitation for this week to focus on anava as your midah, as your character trait. I will try to send you a chant, if you can think of one that goes with anava, and you can just make it up on your own. You know, we could just be singing like, humble, 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 humility, humility, whatever you want to do. So that really was the deep dive into anava. Any questions or thoughts that you have? Yes, Margaret.
It's off the subject, but the idea of the persons people sitting in the same seats or area, I really like that, because especially in our synagogue, it's so many people come, but you know where these people sit, and you can say hello, or if you don't see them, you wonder why they're not there.
Right.
And it's nice, it's very comforting to see, you know, people, this one's there. You always know who sits in certain areas.
Yeah,
Nice.
and that also goes back to the notion of humility. Reminded me when you said if you see someone's not there, you reach out to them, right? And it's about sharing the burden, which is where we started with our understanding of what Mussar is, right? How do we share the burden and help care for our neighbors and our friends?
Isn't also a good listener is the one that is not ready always to answer?
Yes. Yes, a good listener doesn't always have to answer. You can just nod your head.
But also, the problem is people are so used for you to answer that when you're quiet, they say, are you there? Because after learning the wise aging, the contemplative listening, a
Yes.
lot of time has happened to me that people say, are you there? Are you
Yes.
listening? You know, it's like, yes, I'm here. I'm trying to absorb what you're saying.
Yes, so I have learned that you need to actually tell people that you're listening.
You just
Right,
need to
because
say,
I
uh-huh.
didn't, and then my daughter would just be like, you need to say thinking, Ema, you need to say thinking, so I know you're thinking, because I would just sit there like with a
Take the
blank
little
stare.
thing on the computer.
Exactly, the thing on the computer, we need like those, you know, paddles with those like wheels that move. But even just letting them know, like, you know, I hear everything you're saying and I'm listening, I'm not gonna respond, I hear what you're saying, but that's a very good point. People think that you've sort of dropped off the line if you don't respond, because we're so used to wanting to fix things for everybody, right? Oh, let me tell you about my solution, instead of just like, how do we witness?
But
How
also,
do we just witness and hear what people have to say, listening deeply?
but also like my sister lives in Israel. Every day we speak and she tells me, and I just listen. What can I say to her? I'm not there. She said, I just came out of the shelter. So I just said, I'm here to listen. You know, it's very hard to, what can I say?
You can say shamati. Shamati means I hear you.
I hear, yeah, because that's the only thing.
That's it, shamati. I'm listening, I hear you.
Well, just say, yeah, a little sound.
No, I only
Yes.
know when I go,
Email us about your last.
Yes, so if somebody who was not here last week, please add your name.
Amy, I gotta give you mine. It's Spallone author at AOL.
Yes, I think I do have your emails.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
all so much for being here, and I will see you next week for our last class. Spallonewriter@gmail. And Fran.
Every morning. Hi, how are you? Okay.
You know,
Anita?